Today, I want to share with you a book that completely transformed my understanding of how reality actually works. This isn't another self-help book telling you to think positive and wait for miracles. This is something far more profound and, honestly, far more practical than anything I've encountered in decades of reading. Before we dive in, let me tell you about something that happened to a friend of mine. He's a surgeon in Shanghai, very successful, drives a nice car, lives in a beautiful apartment. But last year, he came to me looking absolutely destroyed. His marriage was falling apart, his patients were filing complaints, and he told me he hadn't slept properly in months. He said, "I've tried everything. I've read all the books about positive thinking. I visualize success every morning. I repeat affirmations. Nothing works. The universe clearly doesn't care about what I want." I asked him one simple question that changed everything. I said, "When you visualize success, what are you actually feeling in your body?" He paused for a long time. Then he admitted, "Honestly, anxiety, fear that it won't happen, desperation." And right there, we discovered the fundamental problem that most people never understand about how attraction actually works. He was saying the right words, picturing the right images, but broadcasting a completely different signal. It's like trying to tune into a jazz station while your radio is set to heavy metal. The equipment is working fine, but you're on the wrong frequency entirely. This book we're discussing today finally explains why this happens and, more importantly, what to do about it. The author spent years studying the actual mechanics of how our inner state shapes our outer reality, not through magical thinking, but through principles that, once you understand them, seem almost embarrassingly obvious. Let me share something the book opens with that really struck me. There's this researcher who was studying identical twins separated at birth. These twins grew up in completely different environments, different countries even, different economic circumstances, different educational opportunities. By all external measures, their lives should have turned out completely differently. But what the researcher found was remarkable. The twins who had what the book calls an allowing frequency both ended up successful and fulfilled, despite their different circumstances. The twins who carried what the author calls resistance patterns both struggled, even when one had every external advantage. This finding alone should make us question everything we believe about success and failure. We keep looking at external factors, at education, at connections, at luck, at opportunity. But what if the primary factor is something we carry inside us, something we're broadcasting every moment without even knowing it? I remember when I first started Fan Dung Du Shu, everyone told me I was crazy. A book club? In China? Where people are so busy they barely have time to eat. Who would pay to hear someone talk about books? The external circumstances suggested failure. But here's what I knew that they didn't. I wasn't trying to succeed. I was already living as if sharing books was the most natural thing in the world. The success wasn't something I was chasing. It was something that emerged from alignment. Now I didn't have the vocabulary back then to explain what was happening. This book gives us that vocabulary. It breaks down exactly what's happening when things flow versus when they struggle. The first major insight is what the author calls the difference between wanting and having. This sounds simple, but it's incredibly subtle. When you want something, you are in a state of not having it. Your entire being is organized around absence. You wake up thinking about what's missing. You go to sleep thinking about what you lack. Every visualization, every affirmation, every effort is secretly confirming to the universe that you don't have what you desire. But when you're in a having state, everything shifts. You're not trying to attract anything because you already feel complete. The author uses this brilliant metaphor of breathing. Nobody walks around desperately trying to attract their next breath. You breathe in, you breathe out. There's no anxiety about it. The air is abundant, your body knows how to receive it, and the exchange happens naturally. What if abundance worked the same way? What if the only thing blocking the natural flow of what you desire is your desperate grabbing at it? I think about my wife and the arguments we used to have. She would get upset about something, and I would immediately go into problem-solving mode. Just tell me what you want. Give me specific requirements, and I'll do it. I thought I was being helpful. I thought I was being a good husband. But she would just get more frustrated and say, "If I have to tell you, it doesn't count." For years, I thought this was irrational. How could she expect me to read her mind? But this book helped me understand something. She wasn't asking me to read her mind. She was asking me to be present with her, to actually feel what she was feeling, to connect before trying to fix. My solution-oriented approach was actually a form of resistance. I was trying to make the discomfort go away as fast as possible, rather than allowing it to be what it was. This is what most of us do with everything in life. We encounter something uncomfortable and immediately try to change it, fix it, escape it, or control it. We never just allow it. And this constant resistance creates a kind of energetic static that interferes with the natural flow of life. The author tells this story about a fisherman that really illustrates the point. There was a young man who wanted to learn fishing, so he went to watch the old master who always came back with the biggest catch. He expected to learn some secret technique, some special bait, some particular location. But what he observed confused him completely. The old fisherman would go out on the water and then just sit there. He didn't seem anxious about whether fish would come. He didn't constantly check his line. He didn't move around looking for better spots. He just sat there, almost as if he'd already caught the fish and was just waiting for them to show up. The young man finally asked, "What's your secret?" The old fisherman smiled and said, "I stopped fishing years ago. Now I just go where the fish want to be caught." This sounds like a Zen riddle, but there's actual science behind it. When we're in a state of anxiety, our bodies release stress hormones. These chemicals change our electromagnetic field. Fish, being creatures that navigate partly through electromagnetic sensing, can literally feel our stress and stay away. The old fisherman's relaxed state made him electromagnetically quieter, and fish were naturally drawn to that calm. Now, I'm not saying you need to understand the physics of every interaction, but this example shows that what seems like mystical mumbo-jumbo often has a completely logical explanation once we look deeper. The universe isn't magical. It's mechanical in ways we're only beginning to understand, and this book helps decode those mechanics. Let's talk about something that happens to almost everyone who tries to apply these principles. You read a book like this, you get excited, you try to change your vibration, and then you look at your life and nothing seems different. So you conclude it doesn't work and go back to your old patterns. The author addresses this directly with what I think is one of the most important concepts in the book: the time delay of manifestation. When you plant a seed, you don't dig it up the next day to see if it's growing. You understand that there's a natural process that takes time. The seed has to germinate, put down roots, push through the soil. If you keep digging it up to check, you destroy the very process you're hoping to observe. Our manifestations work the same way. The moment you shift your frequency, something does change, but the physical reality takes time to rearrange itself to match your new signal. During this gap, most people lose faith. They look around, see no evidence of change, and conclude they're doing something wrong. But here's what's actually happening in that gap. The universe is like a giant ship that takes time to turn. You've turned the wheel, the new direction is set, but the ship hasn't completed its turn yet. If you panic and turn the wheel back, you just start the whole process over. I see this constantly with entrepreneurs in our community. Someone decides to start a business. For the first few months, they're excited, aligned, taking action from a place of possibility. Then the results don't come fast enough. They start doubting. They start forcing. They start operating from fear instead of faith. And ironically, that shift in their inner state is exactly what delays their outer results. The author suggests a practice here that seems almost too simple, but is remarkably powerful. Every morning before looking at any evidence of how your life is going, take 5 minutes to feel gratitude for what you've asked for, as if it has already arrived. Not hoping it will come, not trying to attract it, simply feeling the completion of it as a present reality. I tried this myself with something I'd been struggling with for years. I wanted to improve my relationship with my son. We had this pattern where I would try to teach him things and he would resist, and I would get frustrated, and he would shut down, and we'd both feel terrible. I'd read all the parenting books. I knew I was supposed to be patient and understanding, but in the moment, all that knowledge disappeared, and I'd fall back into the same old patterns. So I started this practice. Every morning, I would sit quietly and feel what it would feel like to have a warm, connected relationship with my son. Not the specific outcomes like him getting good grades or being obedient, just the feeling of easy connection, of mutual understanding, of genuine enjoyment in each other's company. Something strange happened. I didn't change my behavior through willpower or technique. The behavior just started changing on its own. I found myself reacting differently in situations that used to trigger me. I became curious instead of frustrated. I started asking questions instead of giving lectures. And my son, responding to this shift, started opening up in ways he never had before. This is what the book means by alignment preceding action. Most of us try to change our actions first, hoping that will change how we feel. But it's actually the reverse. When we change how we feel first, our actions naturally transform to match. Now let me address something I know some of you are thinking. This all sounds very nice, but what about real problems? What about when you're facing serious illness, financial ruin, relationship breakdown? Are you really saying I should just sit there and feel grateful? The author is very clear about this. This is not about denying reality or pretending problems don't exist. It's about understanding that your response to problems determines whether they grow or shrink, whether they persist or transform. There's a story in the book about a woman who was diagnosed with a serious illness. Doctors gave her a poor prognosis. She had every reason to be terrified, angry, and depressed, and initially she was. She spent weeks in that dark place. But then something shifted. She realized that whether she was going to live or die, she didn't want to spend whatever time she had left in fear and misery. So she made a decision, not to pretend she wasn't sick, but to stop letting the sickness define her entire reality. She started focusing on what still brought her joy. She reconnected with old friends. She took up painting, something she'd always wanted to try. She began living as if her life still mattered, because it did. And here's the remarkable part. Her condition stabilized, then it improved. Her doctors couldn't explain it through the treatment alone. Something else was happening. Now, I want to be very careful here. I'm not saying positive thinking cures cancer. That would be irresponsible and potentially harmful. What I am saying is that our inner state affects our biochemistry, our immune function, our ability to respond to treatment. This is not mysticism. This is documented medical science. The field is called psychoneuroimmunology, and it studies exactly this connection between mind and body. The woman in the story didn't heal herself through belief alone. She had medical treatment. But her shift in inner state created conditions where healing could occur more effectively. She stopped fighting against her situation and started working with it. That's a fundamentally different relationship with reality. This brings us to another key concept in the book, the difference between resistance and allowance. Most of us spend our lives in resistance. We resist what's happening. We resist what we're feeling. We resist what other people are doing. We resist the natural flow of change. And all this resistance creates friction that exhausts us and blocks the very outcomes we're trying to achieve. Allowance doesn't mean passivity or acceptance of unacceptable situations. It means acknowledging what is before, trying to change it to what you want it to be. It's a subtle but crucial distinction. Think about it like martial arts. A skilled martial artist doesn't meet force with force. They allow the opponent's energy, then redirect it. The allowing comes first. Without it, you're just pushing against resistance, wearing yourself out, making the conflict worse. I see this in negotiations all the time. When two parties come together and both are in resistance mode, defending their positions, refusing to acknowledge the other's perspective, negotiations drag on forever and usually end badly for everyone. But when one party can genuinely allow the other's position to exist, to acknowledge it without immediately fighting it, something shifts. The other party often softens too. Solutions emerge that nobody could have predicted. The book includes a fascinating section on what the author calls resistance patterns that we inherit without knowing it. These are beliefs and emotional habits passed down through families, cultures, and environments. For example, many people carry a deep belief that wanting things is selfish or that they don't deserve good things. This belief might have originated generations ago in circumstances that made such beliefs protective or necessary, but we inherit them without questioning them, and they continue to shape our reality long after the original circumstances have changed. I think about my grandmother's generation. They lived through wars, famines, incredible hardship. For them, expecting good things was dangerous because disappointment could be crushing. Better to expect nothing and be pleasantly surprised than to hope and be devastated. That was a survival strategy that made sense in their context. But many of us inherited that strategy even though our circumstances are completely different. We unconsciously expect the worst to protect ourselves from disappointment. And in doing so, we often create the very outcomes we fear. The book offers a powerful process for identifying these inherited patterns. You examine what your family believes about money, about success, about love, about possibility, not what they said they believed, but what they actually demonstrated through their behavior and reactions. Often there's a gap between the stated beliefs and the lived beliefs. My father always said he wanted me to succeed, but his reactions told a different story. Whenever I had a success, he would quickly follow it with warnings about not getting too confident, about how things could go wrong, about people who had successes and then lost everything. His intention was protective, but the message I absorbed was that success is dangerous, that celebrating is risky, that it's safer to stay small. I didn't recognize this pattern until I was well into adulthood, wondering why every time I achieved something significant, I would somehow sabotage it or immediately create a new problem. My system had been programmed to see success as a threat, and it was dutifully protecting me from that perceived threat. Recognizing the pattern was the first step, but recognition alone doesn't change it. This is where the book gets really practical. The author provides what might be called reprogramming exercises for shifting these deep patterns. One technique that I found particularly effective is what the author calls completing the past. Here's how it works. You identify a situation from your past where you formed a limiting belief. Then you go back to that memory, not to relive the pain, but to give it a new ending. You imagine what you needed in that moment and give it to yourself now. For me, I went back to those moments after achievements when my father would warn me about the dangers of success. I let myself feel what the child version of me needed to hear, then I provided it. You did something wonderful, and it's okay to enjoy it. Your success doesn't put you in danger. The people who love you will still love you. This might sound simplistic, but the effects were profound. Something that had been clenched inside me for decades started to relax. I noticed I could celebrate accomplishments without the immediate follow-up of anxiety. I could enjoy good things without waiting for the other shoe to drop. The neuroscience behind this is interesting. Our brains don't clearly distinguish between vividly imagined experiences and real ones. That's why visualization can be so powerful for athletes. When you vividly imagine performing a skill, the same neural pathways activate as when you actually perform it. Similarly, when you go back and complete an emotional experience, your brain processes it as if a new experience happened, partially overwriting the old pattern. Now let's talk about something the book addresses that I think is particularly relevant for high-achieving people. The author calls it the trap of positive action. Most successful people get where they are through effort, determination, and relentless action. These are valuable qualities, but they can become their own prison. The belief that everything comes through effort means you can never stop efforting. You're running on a treadmill that speeds up every time you speed up. Rest feels dangerous. Ease feels lazy. You have to keep pushing or everything will fall apart. I lived this way for years. Every achievement only raised the bar for what I had to do next. Every success proved that hard work was the only way, so I had to work even harder. I was exhausted, but I couldn't stop because my entire identity was built on being someone who tried harder than everyone else. The book suggests something radical for people like this. Not that effort is bad, but that there's a different quality of effort that produces better results with less exhaustion. The author distinguishes between forcing and flowing. Forcing is when you're trying to make something happen against resistance. You can feel it in your body as tension, strain, and constriction. Flowing is when you're moving in harmony with what wants to happen. It feels like the current is with you, not against you. The paradox is that flowing often produces more and better results than forcing, while requiring less energy. But most of us have so much experience with forcing that we don't even know what flowing feels like. We've been taught that if it's easy, it must not be valuable. If it feels good, it must be indulgent. Real accomplishment requires suffering. I challenge you to examine this belief. Think about the times in your life when things flowed, when everything seemed to come together easily, when you were in what athletes call the zone. Were those lesser accomplishments because they felt effortless? Or were they often your best work precisely because you weren't fighting against yourself? The author includes a beautiful section on what flowing looks like in different areas of life. In creativity, flowing is when ideas come through you rather than from you, when you're surprised by what emerges. In relationships, flowing is when connection happens naturally, when you're not performing or strategizing but simply present. In business, flowing is when opportunities align, when the right people appear, when solutions emerge from collaboration rather than being forced through willpower. None of this means you don't take action. That would be another misunderstanding. The book is very clear that action is essential, but there's a difference between action arising from alignment and action driven by fear or desperation. The first type tends to be effective and sustainable. The second type produces burnout and often creates new problems while solving old ones. Let me give you an example from my own work. In the early days of Fandeng Du Shu, I was doing everything from a place of passion and flow. I genuinely loved sharing books. I wasn't trying to build an empire. I was just doing what felt natural and meaningful. The growth that happened during that time seemed almost magical. The right people appeared, opportunities aligned, things fell into place. Then we hit a period where growth slowed down. I responded the way most people would. I pushed harder, I forced more, I stressed about numbers and metrics. I started making decisions from anxiety rather than clarity. And you know what happened? Things got worse, not better. The more I forced, the more resistance I encountered. It took a mentor pointing this out for me to see it. He asked me, "When was the last time you enjoyed what you were doing?" I couldn't remember. I had become so focused on results that I'd lost connection with why I started in the first place. When I reconnected with that original energy, when I started making decisions from alignment rather than fear, things shifted again. Not immediately. There was that delay the author talks about. But gradually, the flow returned. This doesn't mean I stopped working hard. It means the quality of my work changed. I was still putting in the hours, still making strategic decisions, still dealing with challenges. But I wasn't fighting against myself anymore. I wasn't powered by fear. And the difference in results was significant. The book has an entire section on money that I think is particularly important because our relationship with money reflects so much about our deeper beliefs. Most people have a conflicted relationship with money. They want it, but they judge people who have it. They need it, but they feel guilty about that need. They work for it, but they secretly believe it's not spiritual or noble to care about it. These contradictions create massive resistance. The author shares a fascinating perspective. Money, like everything else, has a frequency. Not in a mystical sense, but in the sense that your relationship with money creates certain patterns of thought and feeling that either allow it to flow to you or repel it. Think about how you feel when you spend money. Is there constriction and fear, a sense of resources draining away? Or is there a feeling of exchange, of energy moving, of value being traded? People with a flowing relationship with money tend to feel the latter. People who struggle with money tend to feel the former, regardless of how much they actually have. I know people with very little money who have a generous, easy relationship with it. They give freely, they receive easily, and somehow they always have enough. I also know people with enormous wealth who live in constant financial anxiety, always focused on protecting and hoarding, never feeling like they have enough. The difference isn't in the amount, it's in the relationship, and that relationship can be changed. The book suggests examining your earliest money memories. What did money mean in your household? Was it a source of conflict, a scarce resource that caused anxiety? Something that rich people had and regular people didn't? Something dirty or shameful? My early memories of money are complicated. We didn't have much when I was young. Money was something you worried about, something that could run out, something that separated people into categories. Having money meant being different from us. Wanting money meant wanting to be different from your family. These early impressions formed beliefs I carried for decades without examining them. When I started making good money, I was uncomfortable with it. I would sabotage financial success or give it away impulsively, not out of genuine generosity, but out of a deep discomfort with having more than my family had. Working through these patterns was essential for my financial health, not so I could become greedy or materialistic, but so I could have a clean, unambiguous relationship with money as a tool in a form of energy, neither worshiping it nor rejecting it, just allowing it to flow as needed for whatever I wanted to create in the world. The practical exercise the book suggests for this is interesting. For 30 days, you keep track not just of what you spend, but of how you feel when you spend it. Every transaction, you notice your emotional state, anxiety, guilt, pleasure, resentment. You don't try to change anything, you just observe. What this reveals is remarkable. You start seeing patterns you never noticed. Maybe you feel fine spending on others, but guilty spending on yourself. Maybe certain categories trigger anxiety regardless of the amount. Maybe you feel differently spending cash versus card. These patterns are windows into your deeper beliefs about money and worthiness. Once you see the patterns, you can work with them. The book provides specific practices for shifting from scarcity to sufficiency, from fear to trust, from hoarding to flowing. Not through affirmations alone, but through actual felt experiences that create new neural pathways. Now I want to talk about relationships because this is where the principles in this book become both most challenging and most transformative. The author makes a point that initially struck me as harsh, but ultimately felt deeply true. Every relationship in your life is reflecting something back to you. The people who trigger you the most are showing you something about yourself you haven't accepted. The patterns that keep repeating are pointing to beliefs you haven't examined. This is hard to hear when you're in conflict with someone. The natural response is to focus on how wrong they are, how unreasonable their behavior is, how they need to change. But that focus keeps you stuck in the same patterns, often with different people playing the same roles. I think about a pattern I had in my professional life for years. I kept attracting business partners who would initially seem perfect, then reveal themselves to be unreliable or even dishonest. I went through several painful partnerships before I started asking the question the book suggests: what am I contributing to this pattern? The answer wasn't easy to see. I realized that I was so eager to trust, so quick to see the best in people, that I ignored red flags. More than that, my eagerness came from a desire to be validated by having successful partners. I was trying to feel worthy through association, rather than being grounded in my own worth. When I shifted that, when I could appreciate people without needing them to validate me, my partnerships changed. Not immediately, but over time. The people I attracted were different because what I was broadcasting was different. The book is particularly insightful about romantic relationships. It describes what the author calls the mirror effect, where intimate partners are especially powerful reflectors of our unconscious patterns. Have you ever noticed how you can keep your unresolved issues hidden from most people, but somehow your intimate partner sees right through you? They know exactly which buttons to push. They reflect back your shadows with painful precision. This is actually a feature, not a bug. Intimate relationships are growth accelerators precisely because you can't hide from them. The friction that emerges is always pointing to something wanting to be seen and healed. The traditional approach to relationship problems is to either try to change the other person or leave and find someone better. Sometimes leaving is the right choice, but if you leave without understanding what the relationship was showing you, you'll likely recreate the same pattern with someone new. I've watched this happen so many times. Someone ends a marriage because their spouse was controlling. They find a new partner who initially seems the opposite, then reveals the same controlling tendencies. Or someone different who is controlling in different ways. The setting changes, but the scene stays the same. The book suggests that before trying to change a relationship dynamic, you investigate what you're contributing to it, not as self-blame, but as self-empowerment. Because you can't control what others do, but you can change what you bring to interactions. For me, one of the biggest patterns in my marriage was around criticism. I experienced my wife as critical, always noticing what wasn't good enough, rarely acknowledging what was. I felt like I could never measure up no matter how hard I tried. When I examined my contribution to this pattern, I discovered something uncomfortable. I was constantly measuring myself against impossible standards and finding myself lacking. I was my own harshest critic. My wife's perceived criticism was often just noticing things stated neutrally. I was the one adding the judgment and the sense of not being enough. When I started befriending myself, offering compassion instead of criticism to my own imperfections, something remarkable happened. My wife didn't change her behavior significantly, but my experience of her shifted completely. What used to feel like attacks now felt like observations. What used to devastate me now rolled off. The external hadn't changed much. The internal had transformed. This is the real power the book is pointing to. Not that you can manipulate the external world through mental tricks, but that your experience of reality is significantly created by your internal state. Change the internal and the external shifts accordingly, sometimes, literally sometimes, in how you perceive and respond to it. Let's move into something the book addresses that I think is essential for everyone in our modern world: dealing with uncertainty. We live in times of accelerating change. The rules that worked for our parents don't work the same way anymore. Career paths that seem secure disappear overnight. Technologies transform entire industries. Global events disrupt the best-laid plans. Most people respond to uncertainty with anxiety. The unknown feels threatening. The brain, designed to predict and control, goes into overdrive trying to anticipate every possible threat. This is exhausting and, ironically, counterproductive. The more anxiously you try to control an uncertain future, the less able you are to respond effectively to what actually emerges. The book offers a different approach. Instead of trying to eliminate uncertainty, what if you could develop a different relationship with it? What if uncertainty could feel spacious rather than threatening, full of possibility rather than danger? This isn't denial or naivety. It's a genuine shift in orientation based on a deeper understanding of how reality works. The author argues that uncertainty isn't the enemy of creation. It's the necessary space within which creation happens. If everything were certain, nothing could change. Uncertainty is actually the doorway through which new possibilities enter. I remember a period of extreme uncertainty in my professional life when we were considering a major strategic shift. The old model was working well enough, but I sensed its limits. The new direction was unproven, risky, full of unknowns. My team was divided. The data could support either choice. In the old days, I would have agonized over this. I would have tried to gather more data, make more projections. Eliminate the uncertainty through analysis. But I had started practicing what this book teaches. Instead of fighting the uncertainty, I sat with it. I let myself feel the discomfort without trying to resolve it. And in that space, something emerged. It wasn't a logical conclusion. It was more like a knowing, a clarity about direction that hadn't come from the data, but somehow made sense of the data. I made the decision, not with certainty about outcomes, but with clarity about direction. The results were better than anyone expected. But here's what I want to emphasize. Even if the results had been poor, the process would have been valuable because I had developed a new capacity, the ability to move forward without certainty, to act from inner clarity rather than needing external guarantees. This capacity becomes more valuable the more uncertain the world becomes. The people who will thrive in the coming decades are not those who can control uncertainty, because nobody can, but those who can dance with it, remain creative within it, and find opportunity where others see only threat. The book includes practices for developing this capacity. One I particularly like is what the author calls uncertainty breathing. When you notice anxiety about the unknown, instead of trying to resolve it mentally, you breathe into the physical sensation of uncertainty. You let yourself feel it fully without story or resistance. Usually within a few minutes, something shifts. The uncertainty doesn't disappear, but it stops being a problem. It becomes just another sensation, neither good nor bad, that you can coexist with while taking effective action. I want to transition now to something the book handles with surprising depth, the role of suffering. In many approaches to manifestation and positive thinking, suffering is seen as a mistake, evidence that you're doing something wrong, creating bad vibrations, attracting negativity. This perspective, while containing some truth, can become another form of self-aggression. When you're suffering, you add a layer of shame or self-blame on top of it. I shouldn't be feeling this. What's wrong with me? Why can't I just think positive? This book takes a more nuanced view. Yes, prolonged resistance creates suffering. Yes, you have more influence over your experience than you might believe. But also, suffering is part of life. Some of it serves purposes you can't see at the time. And the pressure to always feel good can become its own form of suffering. The author shares a perspective from contemplative traditions that I find helpful. Suffering comes in two varieties, clean and dirty. Clean suffering is the direct pain of difficult experiences. Someone you love dies and you grieve. That's clean. Dirty suffering is what we add on top. The stories about why it shouldn't have happened, the resistance to feeling what we feel, the self-judgment about not handling it better. You can't always prevent clean suffering, but you can learn to reduce dirty suffering by changing your relationship with the clean kind. Instead of fighting against pain, you allow it. Instead of adding stories, you stay with the direct experience. This doesn't make pain disappear, but it stops it from multiplying. I experienced this distinction personally when my father passed away. The grief was immense, clean suffering, but on top of it, I was piling dirty suffering, regret about things I didn't say, guilt about not visiting enough, self-judgment about crying, about not crying enough, about not grieving the right way. When I could distinguish these layers, something opened. The grief was still there, but it was cleaner. I could let myself feel it without the extra weight. And in that cleaner grief, there was actually something that felt alive, connected, even beautiful. The love that made the loss so painful was itself precious. Clean suffering can have a quality of aliveness that dirty suffering never has. This understanding changed how I approach difficult periods. I still don't enjoy them, but I've stopped making them worse by fighting against them. I've stopped adding the suffering of shouldn't on top of the suffering of is. The book connects this to manifestation in an important way. When you're in dirty suffering, you're creating massive resistance. You're broadcasting a signal of wrongness that attracts more experiences of wrongness. But when you can meet difficulty with clean presence, when you can allow without adding resistance, you maintain your alignment even in hard circumstances. This doesn't prevent hard circumstances, but it prevents them from spiraling and allows you to respond more effectively. Let me share something about groups and collective fields that I found fascinating in this book. We've been talking mostly about individual experience, but we don't exist in isolation. We're constantly swimming in collective fields, the shared energy of families, organizations, nations, humanity as a whole. These collective fields influence us in ways we rarely recognize, and we contribute to them in ways we rarely intentionally choose. The author describes how certain groups seem to accomplish much more than the sum of their individual capabilities. It's as if the group itself has a level of intelligence that individual members don't possess separately. Other groups seem to make everyone stupider, more reactive, less capable than they would be alone. The difference isn't necessarily in the individuals. It's in the field they create together. The quality of attention, the degree of presence, the level of trust, the handling of conflict. These subtle factors create a container within which more or less becomes possible. I've experienced this in our organization. There have been periods where we seem to be in a collective flow state, ideas built on each other, problems solved themselves through natural collaboration. The work was hard but energizing. And there have been periods where everything felt like pushing mud uphill. The same people, the same resources, but a completely different collective field. The book suggests that leaders have a disproportionate influence on these collective fields, not through authority, but through their own inner state. When a leader is contracted, anxious, and controlling, the whole field tends to contract. When a leader can remain open, present, and trusting, even in difficulty, the collective field stays open with them. This has changed how I think about my responsibility as a leader. It's not just about strategy and decisions, it's about the quality of presence I bring, because that presence is constantly contributing to the field within which others operate. There's a practice the book suggests for teams that I found valuable. Before any important meeting or collaborative work, everyone takes a minute of silence, not to think about the agenda, but to arrive fully, to let go of whatever they were doing before, to become present in the space with each other. It seems like a small thing, a minute of silence, but the difference in meeting quality is noticeable. When people are actually present instead of just physically in the room, something different becomes possible. Solutions emerge that wouldn't have appeared otherwise. Conflicts that seemed intractable find resolution. The group intelligence that was potential becomes actual. I want to spend some time on what the book says about action, because I think there's a common misunderstanding about these ideas that needs to be addressed. When people hear about attraction, vibration, and alignment, they sometimes conclude that action isn't important. Just visualize what you want, feel good about it, and the universe will deliver. This is a dangerous misunderstanding that leads to passivity dressed up as spirituality. The author is emphatic. Action is essential. You can't just sit in your room imagining abundance and expect it to appear. The universe responds to action, but here's the key. It responds much more powerfully to aligned action than to desperate action. Think about the difference between searching for something and finding something. When you're searching, there's a quality of grasping, of effort, of not having. When you're finding, there's a quality of discovery, of receiving, of having. The same action, looking for something, feels completely different in these two states. Aligned action is action that comes from finding rather than searching. You've already connected with what you desire internally. The action isn't trying to create connection, but expressing the connection that already exists. It's lighter, more effective, and sustainable in ways that desperate action never is. I notice this in my own work patterns. When I'm creating content from alignment, it flows. I'm not trying to impress anyone or prove anything. I'm just expressing what's already alive in me. The work is still work, but it has a quality of play. And interestingly, this content tends to resonate more with people than content I created through effort and strain. When I'm out of alignment, I can still force content into existence, but it's exhausting. There's a quality of pushing that people can somehow sense. The same technical skill produces different results depending on the state from which it's applied. The practical teaching here is, don't skip the alignment phase. Before launching into action, take time to connect with why this matters, to feel the completion of what you're working toward, to come into a state of already having rather than desperately wanting, then let action emerge from that state. This doesn't mean you always feel great when taking action. Sometimes aligned action includes discomfort. The difference is whether you're acting with the discomfort or fighting against it, whether the action is arising naturally or being forced into existence. I want to talk about something the book calls the trap of self-improvement. Many people who read books like this are on what they'd call a path of self-improvement. They want to be better, do better, feel better. They read books, attend workshops, practice techniques, all in service of becoming an improved version of themselves. The author points to something subtle but important here. The very project of self-improvement can become another form of not accepting yourself. The endless focus on what needs to change implies that who you are now is not enough. The constant reaching toward a better future means never fully landing in the present. This doesn't mean you should stop growing. Growth is natural and beautiful, but there's a difference between growth that comes from self-rejection and growth that comes from self-acceptance. Growth from self-rejection says, I'm not okay as I am, so I need to change. Growth from self-acceptance says, I'm complete as I am, and from this completeness, new possibilities naturally unfold. The first kind of growth is exhausting because you can never arrive. Every improvement reveals new deficiencies. The bar keeps moving. The imagined future where you're finally enough never comes. The second kind of growth is nourishing because you're already home. Changes happen not because you're insufficient, but because growth is what alive things do. A tree doesn't grow because it's not good enough as a sapling. It grows because that's its nature. I spent years in the first kind of growth. Every book I read, every practice I adopted, was aimed at fixing something wrong with me. I was productive in that period, accomplished things, developed skills, but there was an underlying exhaustion and never enoughness that colored everything. The shift to the second kind of growth was gradual. It started with moments when I could just be, without the improvement project, and notice that this was okay. Actually, more than okay. In those moments, I was more creative, more connected, more effective than when I was striving. Now I read books like this differently, not looking for what's wrong with me to fix, but looking for what wants to emerge. Not trying to become someone different, but understanding more deeply who I already am. The same material, but a completely different relationship with it. The book includes a beautiful practice for this. Each morning, before any improvement project, before any goal setting or visualization, simply be with yourself as you are, not trying to change anything, not evaluating or judging, just being. In this being, you might notice tension, discomfort, resistance. That's fine. You're not trying to get rid of it. You might notice peace, spaciousness, contentment. That's fine too. You're not trying to hold on to it. You're just being allowing whatever's there to be there. From this foundation of self-acceptance, whatever growth wants to happen can happen more naturally. You're not pushing yourself. You're allowing yourself. And paradoxically, more becomes possible when you start from a place of being enough than when you're desperately trying to become enough. Let me turn now to something the book addresses that I think will become increasingly important: the relationship between individual and collective transformation. The challenges facing humanity are enormous. Climate change, technological disruption, political polarization, economic inequality. No individual can solve these problems alone. They require collective action on a scale we've never achieved. Some people respond to this by turning inward, focusing on their own consciousness, their own peace, their own manifestation, leaving the big problems to someone else. Others respond by turning outward, throwing themselves into activism and world changing, often burning out or becoming bitter when change doesn't happen fast enough. The book suggests a third way. Your inner transformation and the outer transformation of the world are not separate projects. They're intimately connected. As you shift your own consciousness, you contribute to a shift in the collective field. And as you engage with the world's challenges from a place of inner alignment, your engagement becomes more effective and sustainable. This is not magical thinking. It's recognition of how influence actually works. When you change, your relationships change. When your relationships change, your community changes. When communities change, societies change. The personal and political are not separate domains. They're nested within each other. I see this in our community. When individuals transform through their engagement with books and ideas, they bring that transformation into their families, workplaces, and social circles. They become points of light that illuminate others. We're not just building a reading community, we're contributing to a more conscious society. The book includes a concept I find compelling: that we're in a period of species-wide transformation. The crises we're facing are not simply problems to be solved with better technology or policy. They're symptoms of a consciousness that has outgrown its container. And the only way through is a shift in consciousness itself. This doesn't mean sitting around waiting for everyone to become enlightened before we address practical problems. It means addressing practical problems while also doing the consciousness work. The outer action and inner transformation proceed together, each supporting the other. I'm aware that some of this sounds idealistic, perhaps naively so given the real darkness in our world. But the author isn't naive. They acknowledge the severity of what we face. They simply point out that despair and cynicism, however justified they might feel, are not effective responses. They're forms of giving up that guarantee the bad outcomes they fear. What's the alternative? Not blind optimism, not denial, but a kind of fierce commitment to possibility. a refusal to give up on humanity or on yourself, a recognition that every moment offers a choice point, and the accumulated choices of billions of humans is what creates the future. Your choice matters more than you think, not because you're special, but because everyone's choice matters. The collective field is changed by each individual who changes their orientation within it. As we near the end of our exploration, I want to address something that often comes up for people engaging with these ideas. The question of evidence. Is there any proof that this works? How do we know it's not just confirmation bias, people noticing the hits and forgetting the misses? Where's the scientific support? The author takes an interesting position. They're not defensive about the limits of scientific validation. They acknowledge that much of what they're pointing to operates in domains that are difficult to measure. Inner states, qualities of consciousness, subtle fields. These don't easily reduce to the kind of data that scientific papers require. At the same time, they point to converging lines of evidence. Research on placebo effects demonstrating the power of expectation. Studies on meditation showing measurable brain changes. Heart rate variability research showing how emotional states affect physiology. Quantum physics revealing a universe far stranger than materialist assumptions can account for. None of this proves the book's framework in a strict sense, but it creates a space of possibility. It suggests that our conventional understanding of how reality works is incomplete. And within that incomplete understanding, there's room for phenomena that our current paradigms struggle to explain. My own relationship with evidence has evolved. Earlier in life, I wanted proof before I try anything. Show me the studies. Give me the data. Convince my rational mind. Now I'm more pragmatic. I notice what works regardless of whether there's a peer-reviewed study explaining why. If visualizing outcomes consistently leads to better outcomes, I don't need to wait for a mechanism to be discovered before using the technique. If certain inner states correlate with better life results, I can cultivate those states whether or not science has caught up. This isn't abandoning rationality. It's applying rationality more practically. The rational thing to do is use whatever works, whether or not it's fully understood. Almost every medical treatment in history was used before it was understood. Understanding can come later. Effectiveness can be observed now. The book suggests trying the practices with an experimental mindset, not believing or disbelieving, but testing. Run your own experiments. Apply the principles and see what happens. Your own experience is the most relevant data for your own life. This is the approach I've taken. The ideas in this book have been tested in my life for years now. The results speak for themselves. Not perfectly, not magically, but consistently enough that I've continued applying them and sharing them with others. We're coming to the end of our journey together through this book, and I want to leave you with something practical, something you can start applying immediately. The author distills everything into what they call the essential practice. It's remarkably simple, which makes it easy to dismiss, but also easy to do. Every morning, before engaging with the world, take 5 minutes for what the author calls intentional being. This is not meditation in the traditional sense. You're not trying to empty your mind or achieve any particular state. You're simply being intentional about how you start your day. In those 5 minutes, you do 3 things. First, you feel gratitude, not as a concept, but as a body sensation. You let yourself feel grateful for something specific, anything, the comfortable bed, the people in your life, the fact that you're alive. You feel this gratitude in your cells, not just think it in your head. Second, you connect with what you want to create, not with yearning or desperation, with the sense that it's already moving toward you, already taking shape in ways you can't see. You feel the having, not the wanting. You let your nervous system experience the completion, even though your circumstances haven't changed yet. Third, you release. You let go of how it needs to happen. You let go of controlling the timeline. You let go of knowing better than the universe how your desires should manifest. You open to being surprised by how things unfold. 5 minutes, 3 components. Gratitude, connection, release. Simple enough that you'll think it can't possibly make a difference. But the author reports, and my own experience confirms, that this simple practice, done consistently, shifts something fundamental about how life flows. The key word is consistently. Not doing this when you remember or when you feel like it. Doing it every day, like brushing your teeth. Building it into the non-negotiable structure of your life. Most people won't do this. Not because they disagree with it, but because simple things are easy not to do. They'll read about it, nod in agreement, and forget by tomorrow. In a week, this will be a vague memory of something they were going to try. But some of you will actually implement it. You'll commit to those 5 minutes every morning. And over weeks and months, you'll start noticing shifts, things flowing more easily, opportunities appearing, Problems resolving? Not through magic, but through a changed relationship with reality. I'm speaking to you, the ones who will actually do this. Don't let the simplicity fool you. Don't let your sophisticated mind convince you that something this easy can't work. Try it. Give it 90 days, see what happens. And as you practice, remember the core insight of this entire book. You are not separate from the creative force of the universe. That force is not outside you, somewhere to be petitioned or appeased. It is what you are. It flows through you in every moment. Your job is not to attract anything from outside yourself. Your job is to remove the blocks to what naturally wants to flow through you, to stop the resistance, the forcing, the doubting, to align with what's already here. This is good news. It means you don't need to earn or deserve or prove yourself worthy. You already are what you're looking for. The kingdom is within. It always has been. What remains is to live from this recognition, not as a concept, but as a lived experience. Not occasionally, but consistently. Not someday, but now. The practices in this book, the understanding it conveys, these are all in service of one thing: helping you remember what you are, helping you live from wholeness instead of trying to achieve it, helping you flow instead of force. In the end, the law of attraction is not a technique for getting what you want. It's a description of how reality works. Understand how it works, align with how it works, and getting what you want becomes natural rather than effortful. The universe is not a machine to be manipulated. It's a field of intelligence that responds to your energy. Come into harmony with that field, and life becomes a dance. Stay at war with it, and life remains a struggle. The choice, as always, is yours. Now, I want to share something personal about my relationship with this material that might be useful for you. When I first encountered these ideas years ago, I was skeptical. My training was in engineering, in logic, in proof. The language of vibration and attraction seemed soft, unmeasurable, perhaps delusional. I filed it under nice ideas for people who don't think clearly. What changed my mind wasn't argument or evidence, it was observation. I started noticing patterns in my own life that this framework explained better than the rational model I'd been using. Why did certain periods of my life flow so easily, while others were constant struggle despite similar circumstances? Why did some goals materialize almost effortlessly, while others I achieved only through grinding effort that left me exhausted? Why did my inner state seem to correlate with external outcomes in ways that couldn't just be performance effects? The conventional explanation is that these are illusions, patterns we impose on randomness, stories we tell ourselves after the fact. And maybe that's true for some of it, but not all. The correlations were too consistent, too predictable, too repeatable. So I started experimenting. Not believing, but testing. What happens if I shift my inner state before taking action? What happens if I approach goals with having energy instead of wanting energy? What happens if I practice gratitude not as a concept, but as a body experience? The results convinced me. Not that I understand exactly how this works, but that it does work. That's enough for practical purposes. I'm sharing this because I know some of you have the same skeptical orientation I did. And I want to say that skepticism is valuable. Don't abandon it, but also don't let it prevent you from experimenting. Hold the ideas lightly. Test them thoroughly. Let your experience be the teacher. Science advances through experiments, not arguments. Treat your life as a laboratory. Run the experiments this book suggests. See what data emerges. One more thing before we close. The author makes a point that I think is essential for integrating these ideas in a healthy way. This is not about perfection. It's not about always being positive, always being aligned, never having a bad day. That kind of pressure is just another form of resistance, another way of not accepting yourself as you are, another impossible standard to fail to meet. The reality is messier. You'll have days where you forget everything you've learned and react in old patterns. You'll have periods where flow seems impossible and forcing feels like the only option. You'll have moments when doubt swamps faith and despair seems like the only reasonable response. This is not failure. This is being human. The practice is not about never falling out of alignment. It's about noticing when you have, accepting it without judgment, and returning again and again, not perfectly, but persistently. Over time, the frequency of alignment increases. The duration of departure decreases, not through willpower, but through familiarity. You know what alignment feels like. You recognize departure more quickly. The return becomes more natural. This is the real journey, not a destination of permanent enlightenment, but an ongoing dance between remembering and forgetting, aligning and drifting, practicing, and failing. The point is not to reach some final state. The point is to engage fully with the journey itself. And here's what I found. Engaging with this journey, however imperfectly, is more satisfying than not engaging at all. Even the difficult parts have a quality of aliveness that unconscious living lacks. Struggling within the framework is more interesting than not knowing there's a framework at all. So take what serves you from this book and leave what doesn't. Apply it imperfectly and forgive yourself for the imperfection. Keep experimenting. Keep returning. Let the ideas prove themselves through your experience or be revised accordingly. The universe is patient. It will keep reflecting back to you what you're putting out. The invitation to align is always open. It doesn't matter how many times you've declined before. Start where you are. Use what you have. Do what you can. And perhaps as you practice and observe, you'll come to your own understanding of how this all works. Perhaps you'll discover truths that go beyond what any book can teach. Perhaps your life itself will become the teaching that helps others find their way. That's my hope for you. Not that you'll believe everything in this book, but that you'll use it as a catalyst for your own discovery. That the ideas here will spark something in you that burns long after the words are forgotten. Thank you for walking through this with me. Thank you for your willingness to consider these ideas, whatever conclusions you ultimately reach. Thank you for your intention to live more consciously, more deliberately, more aligned. The journey continues. Every moment is a new beginning, and whatever you're looking for is already looking for you.